While Nintendo and Sega fought for the next console, Sony quietly changed what winning even meant and turned gaming into a global platform. For a decade, the war looked simple. Nintendo had rules, Sega had rebellion, and everyone else had to choose a side. The industry was still young enough to believe power lived inside plastic shells, inside chips, cartridges, clock speeds, and mascots. The fight was framed like sports. Who had the better team, the better offense, the better fans? But Sony didn't enter to win that war. Sony entered to replace it, because Sony understood a brutal truth most companies learn too late. If you fight someone inside their game, you're already losing. You win by changing the game. Sony wasn't born in toys or arcades, it was born in electronics and media, music, film, broadcasting, global distribution, manufacturing at scale. When Sony looked at gaming in the early 1990s, it didn't see an industry that needed another console. It saw an industry that needed an operating system, not in the technical sense, in the economic sense, a place where creators and players could meet, and where the company in the middle could collect power without looking like it was collecting power. Sega fought Nintendo's rules. Sony fought something else, the shape of the market. And the seed of it began with betrayal. Sony had been working with Nintendo on a CD-based add-on. On paper, it was collaboration. Move games from cartridges to discs, expand storage, cut costs, unlock richer audio and video. It was a bridge from one era to the next. Then Nintendo walked away. Most companies would have swallowed the loss and moved on. Sony didn't. Sony treated the moment like a blueprint falling into its hands. Because if Nintendo, the most disciplined, most cautious power in gaming, was afraid of what discs could change, then discs were exactly where the future lived. Inside Sony, there was a fork in the road. One path was obvious: keep playing nice, stay a supplier, maybe return later. The other path was dangerous: build a platform that would make Nintendo's entire system feel old. The dangerous path won. Now look at the battlefield Sony stepped into. Nintendo had built a controlled ecosystem after the 1983 crash. Its rules weren't just about hardware quality, they were about power. Cartridge manufacturing, licensing approvals, limits on releases, strict content rules, and contracts that quietly forced developers to stay loyal. Sega had proven you could punch that system. It made gaming louder, older, faster. It shifted culture. It turned consoles into identities. But Sega's rebellion also created noise, fragmentation, add-ons, competing futures. Sega taught the world the system could be challenged, but it never built the replacement. Sony would. Sony's move was simple, almost boring, and that's why it was lethal. Sony went after the people who actually create value in gaming, developers, not players first, not mascots, not slogans, developers. Cartridges were expensive. This part matters more than most people realize. A cartridge isn't just a storage device, it's an upfront bet. Manufacturing is costly, inventory is physical, shipping is slow, and if the game doesn't sell, the unsold cartridges aren't just embarrassing, they're financial poison. Nintendo's system thrived in that world because it could control the gate. But discs changed the economics. Discs were cheap to press, easier to ship, quicker to restock, and much harder for one company to own through manufacturing choke points. That meant the cost of failure dropped. And when the cost of failure drops, risk-taking explodes. Sony didn't just make games bigger, it made risk cheaper. This is where Sony's real advantage appeared. It offered licensing terms that felt like oxygen. It offered tools that felt professional. It offered a brand that didn't treat developers like children asking permission. Suddenly, studios that had been boxed in by Nintendo's release limits, or exhausted by Sega's chaos, saw a third door, and they walked through it. This is the moment console war becomes the wrong phrase, because Sony wasn't building a console war strategy. Sony was building an ecosystem strategy. If enough creators build for your platform becomes the default, and once you become the default, everyone else has to fight uphill. Not because they're worse, But because momentum has shifted, developers go where the audience is. The audience goes where the games are. And the company in the middle doesn't have to shout control. Control just happens. Sony also understood something cultural that Sega only half grasped. Gaming wasn't just growing up. Gaming was becoming identity-driven mainstream. Nintendo still carried the image of family-friendly fun. Sega positioned itself as the rebellious teenager. Sony positioned itself as something else entirely, modern, adult, global. PlayStation advertising didn't feel like toy commercials. It felt like a message from the future. Minimalist, weird, bold. Like the console was part of your personality, not something you begged your parents to buy. This was subtle, but powerful. Because when a product becomes part of identity, the buyer stops comparing specs, they compare belonging. But Sony's real weapon wasn't just branding. It was structure. It built relationships with publishers. It invested in studios. It created development pipelines. It treated the platform like an entertainment network, not a console. This meant the PlayStation could scale across countries and genres without needing to reinvent itself each year. Sega needed constant noise to stay visible. Sony needed consistency to become inevitable. Mini hook. Sega tried to win by moving fast. Sony won by becoming the place everyone moved to. And then the industry tipped. Once third-party studios realized where the momentum was going, the shift accelerated. Publishers weren't choosing between Nintendo and Sega anymore. They were choosing between a closed system with rules, a fragmented system with chaos, or a platform that felt like opportunity. Opportunity won. This is why PlayStation didn't just beat competitors, it changed the incentives. Suddenly, success wasn't primarily about the console you sold. It was about the marketplace you hosted. The console became a passport. The platform became the country. When PlayStation 2 arrived and became the best-selling console ever, most people thought the secret was the DVD player, the specs, the game library. Those things mattered. But the deeper truth is that PlayStation 2 wasn't just a device. It was a distribution machine for an already established platform economy. By then, developers were trained to build for Sony. Players expected Sony. Retailers trusted Sony. Marketing pipelines were set. Production and publishing was optimized around the ecosystem. The machine was already running. The box was just the next version of the same system. And this is the part where Sega's story turns tragic. Sega's Dreamcast was brilliant, forward-looking, innovative, online features ahead of its time, arcade-perfect experiences. But innovation doesn't automatically beat a platform, because by the time Dreamcast arrived, Sony had already achieved the thing that's hardest to beat in any market: default status. Default status is invisible power. People don't consciously decide, "I will obey the platform." They just follow the path of least friction. Developers build where it's easiest to sell. Players buy where it's easiest to find games. And the platform sits in the center collecting gravity. Now zoom out, because this is where missed billions becomes bigger than gaming. Sony's playbook didn't stay in consoles. It became the blueprint for modern power. Microsoft used it in software platforms. Apple used it in app ecosystems. Google used it in mobile distribution. Steam used it in PC marketplaces. Streaming services used it in content pipelines. All of them follow the same rule: control the marketplace, and you control the future. So what did Sony really do? It took gaming from products to infrastructure. Nintendo built rules to prevent chaos. Sega broke rules to win culture. Sony built a system where rules became unnecessary, because the ecosystem itself enforced behavior. The war didn't end because one company won. It ended because the battlefield changed shape. And once the battlefield is a platform, the winner doesn't look like a winner. It looks like a standard. That's the scariest kind of power. Because you can argue with a company, but you don't argue with a standard. You build around it, you comply with it, you accept it as reality. And this sets up episode 4. Because if Sony turned gaming into a platform economy, the final question is, what happens when platforms become the default way every industry works? When the rules stop being printed in contracts and start being embedded in the system itself, Sony didn't win by breaking the rules. It won by turning rules into infrastructure. Watch Episode 4, The Invisible System Behind Every Console, and Why We're Still Living Inside It.